The wagon train lurched to a sudden halt, throwing Sara Gibson forward against the splintered wooden bench, and she knew before anyone said a word that her attempt to reach California had just ended in the worst possible way. Bandits! Someone screamed, and gunfire erupted across the prairie like thunder breaking over the Montana territory. It was August of 1876, and Sara had spent every cent she possessed to escape her uncle's house in St. Louis, to flee the marriage he had arranged to a cruel merchant twice her age. She was 22 years old and had believed freedom waited somewhere in the Golden West, but as masked men on horseback circled the wagons, firing rifles into the air and shouting demands, she realized how foolish her dreams had been. The wagon master fell from his horse, clutching his shoulder. Women screamed. Children cried. Sara pressed herself against the wagon side, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She had no weapon, no protection, nothing but the worn dress on her back and a small bag containing 3 changes of clothing and her mother's Bible. "Everyone out," one of the bandits yelled. "Leave your valuables in a pile and nobody else gets hurt." Sara climbed down on shaking legs, joining the other passengers in a frightened cluster. There were 7 bandits, their faces covered with bandanas, their eyes hard and merciless. They moved through the wagon systematically, tearing through trunks and bags, taking everything of value. When they reached Sara, one of them grabbed her arm roughly. "This one's pretty," he said, his voice carrying an edge that made her stomach turn to ice. "Might be worth more than whatever trinkets she's carrying." "Please," Sara whispered, trying to pull away. "Please just take my things." "Oh, we will," another bandit laughed. "But you're coming with us too, sweetheart. You'll fetch a good price across the border." Terror flooded through her, pure and overwhelming. She had heard stories of women stolen and sold, disappearing into lives of unspeakable horror. She tried to scream, but a rough hand clamped over her mouth. The bandit started dragging her toward his horse, and Sara fought with everything she had, kicking and twisting, but he was too strong. Then a rifle shot cracked through the air, different from the others, deeper and more purposeful. The bandit holding Sara suddenly released her and spun around. Another shot followed immediately, and one of the bandits toppled from his horse with a scream. From the ridge above the trail, a massive figure on a dark horse emerged, and even at this distance, Sara could see he was unlike anyone she had ever encountered. He sat tall in the saddle, his shoulders impossibly broad, his long dark hair flowing past his shoulders. He held a rifle with casual confidence, and as he urged his horse down the slope, the bandits scattered in confusion. "That's Decker Reed," one of them shouted. "Ride, ride now." The name clearly meant something to them because they abandoned their looting instantly, spurring their horses and fleeing across the prairie in a cloud of dust. The man called Decker Reed fired twice more, not to kill but to hasten their departure, and within moments the bandits had vanished over the horizon. Sara stood frozen, her legs unable to hold her any longer. She sank to her knees in the dirt, shaking uncontrollably. The massive man rode down to the wagon train, dismounting with fluid grace despite his size. Up close, he was even more imposing. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that strained against his buckskin shirt. His face was weathered and hard, with a strong jaw covered in dark stubble and eyes the color of storm clouds. His hair hung to his shoulders in thick waves, and everything about him spoke of raw, untamed strength. "Everyone all right?" His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together, but there was genuine concern in it. The wagon master, clutching his wounded shoulder, nodded shakily. "Thanks to you, Mr. Reed. They would have taken everything." Decker's eyes swept over the group and landed on Sara, still kneeling in the dirt. He walked toward her, his boots making heavy sounds on the hard ground. When he reached her, he crouched down, bringing himself to her eye level. This close, she could see scars on his hands and forearms, marks of a life lived hard and dangerous. "You hurt?" he asked. Sara shook her head, not trusting her voice. Her whole body trembled and she could not seem to make it stop. "Shock," Decker said, more to himself than to her. He stood and turned to the wagon master. "You folks can't continue like this. Your master's wounded, half your supplies are scattered, and those bandits might circle back with reinforcements once they realize I'm alone." "What do you suggest?" an older man asked. "There's a settlement about 15 miles north. Red Cloud, Montana. It's not much, but there's a doctor and a sheriff. You should hole up there, at least until you can regroup." The wagon master nodded weakly. "Can you guide us?" Decker hesitated, his jaw tightening. Sara got the impression he was a man who preferred solitude, who did not involve himself in other people's problems. But then his eyes returned to her, taking in her pale face and shaking hands, and something in his expression shifted. "I'll take you there," he said. "But we move now, while we still have daylight." The journey to Red Cloud took the rest of the day. Decker rode ahead, scouting the trail, occasionally circling back to check on the group. Sara sat in the wagon, unable to shake the memory of the bandits' hands on her, the terrible certainty that she had been seconds away from a fate worse than death. The other women tried to comfort her, but their words seemed to come from very far away. When they finally reached Red Cloud, the sun was setting in streaks of orange and purple across the vast Montana sky. The town was small, maybe 20 buildings clustered around a single main street. But there was a hotel, a general store, a saloon, and most importantly, a doctor's office with a painted sign. Decker helped organize the wagons, directed the wounded wagon master to the doctor, and spoke with the local sheriff, a grizzled man named Tom who clearly knew and respected him. Through it all, Sara watched him from the wagon, struck by how competent he was, how people seemed to defer to his judgment naturally. When everything was settled and the passengers were being directed to the hotel, Decker approached her wagon. Sara had not moved, still sitting on the bench, her bag clutched to her chest. "You need to get down now," he said, not unkindly. "Get some food and rest." "I have no money," Sara heard herself say. The words felt distant, like someone else was speaking them. "The bandits took everything. I cannot pay for a room." Decker studied her for a long moment. Then he reached up, and before she could react, he lifted her down from the wagon as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. His hands were warm through the fabric of her dress, and when her feet touched the ground, she swayed. He steadied her with one hand on her elbow. "When's the last time you ate?" Sara tried to remember. "This morning, I think." He made a sound of disapproval deep in his chest and guided her toward the hotel. The proprietor, a heavy woman with kind eyes, looked up as they entered. "Decker Raid," she said warmly. "Haven't seen you in town for months, Mrs. Patterson. I need a room for this lady. She was on the wagon train that got hit by bandits." Mrs. Patterson's expression filled with sympathy. "Oh, you poor dear, of course. Room 3, top of the stairs. And I'll send up some supper." "I told you I have no money," Sara protested weakly. "I'll cover it," Decker said, pulling coins from his pocket. "No, I cannot accept charity. It's not charity." His voice was firm but not harsh. "Those bandits are my problem. I've been tracking them for 2 weeks. If I'd caught up with them sooner, you wouldn't have lost your money, so I'm making it right." Sara stared at him, surprised by this reasoning. Before she could argue further, he pressed a key into her hand. "Get some rest," he said. Then he turned and walked out of the hotel, leaving her standing in the small lobby with Mrs. Patterson. "Don't mind his rough manner," the older woman said with a smile. Decker Reed is the best man in the Montana Territory, even if he does prefer mountains to people. Now come on, let's get you settled. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. Mrs. Patterson brought up a tray with beef stew, fresh bread, and coffee, and Sara realized she was ravenous. She ate mechanically, her mind churning with questions and fears. What would she do now? She had been traveling to California to find work, perhaps as a teacher or a seamstress. But without money, she was stranded in this tiny Montana town. She had no family to wire for help, no one she could ask for assistance. Her uncle had made it clear she was no longer welcome in his house after she refused his chosen marriage arrangement. She was alone, and the realization sat heavy in her chest. The next morning, Sara woke to sunlight streaming through her window. For a moment, she could not remember where she was, and then it all came rushing back. She dressed in one of her remaining clean dresses, a simple brown cotton affair that had seen better days, and went downstairs. Mrs. Patterson was in the dining room setting out breakfast for the hotel guests. "Good morning, dear. Did you sleep?" "A little," Sara admitted. "Mrs. Patterson, I need to find work. I cannot continue accepting charity." The older woman's face was sympathetic. "Well, let's see. The general store might need help, though old Mr. Hendricks is particular about who he hires. The saloon always needs girls, but I wouldn't recommend it to a decent young lady. The school had a teacher, but she married and moved to Helena last month, so they might need someone." "I can teach," Sara said quickly. "I had 2 years of normal school back in Missouri. Then you should speak to Reverend Miller. He handles school matters. The church is just down the street." Sara thanked her and stepped out into the bright Montana morning. Red Cloud was already bustling with activity despite the early hour. Cowboys rode past, their horses kicking up dust. A freight wagon rumbled down the street. Women with baskets moved between the stores, and men gathered outside the saloon, even though it could not be much past 8 in the morning. She found the church easily, a small white building with a modest steeple. Reverend Miller was a thin man in his 50s with spectacles and a kind smile. He listened to Sara's qualifications and nodded thoughtfully. "We do need a teacher," he admitted. "But the town council makes the final decision, and they won't meet until next week." "Can you wait that long?" "I'll have to," Sara said, trying to hide her disappointment. As she left the church, she nearly collided with a solid wall of muscle. Strong hands caught her shoulders, steadying her, and she looked up into Decker Reed's face. "Sorry," he said, releasing her immediately. "Wasn't watching where I was going." "No, it was my fault," Sara said. In the daylight, she could see him more clearly. He wore a buckskin shirt that showed the powerful muscles of his chest and arms, pants tucked into worn boots, and a wide-brimmed hat. His face was striking rather than handsome, all hard angles and weather-beaten skin, but there was something compelling about him nonetheless. "You feeling better?" he asked. "Yes, thank you, and thank you for yesterday, for everything," he shrugged, looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Like I said, those bandits are my problem. Are you a lawman?" "Sometimes. I scout for the cavalry when they need it, track criminals when the bounty's worth my time, and spend the rest of my days in the mountains where people leave me alone." He said this last part with definite emphasis, as if warning her not to expect more conversation. But Sara found herself curious despite his obvious desire for solitude. "Why were you tracking those bandits? They killed a family 2 weeks ago. Homesteaders trying to make a life out here. Good people." His jaw tightened. Nobody deserves to die like that. Before Sara could respond, a young woman came running down the street, her face panicked. "Mr. Reed, Mr. Reed, please, you have to help." Decker turned, his entire demeanor shifting to alert readiness. "What's wrong, Annie? It's my brother Bobby. He went into the foothills yesterday afternoon to check the trap line and he never came back. My pa's sick, can't go looking, and Sheriff Tom's got a broken leg from last week. Please, Bobby's only 15. He could be hurt." Decker did not hesitate. "When did you last see him?" "Yesterday around noon. He took the trail up toward Cedar Ridge. I'll find him." Decker started toward the livery stable, then paused and looked back at Sara. She was still standing there watching him. "You should get back to the hotel. Can I help?" The words came out before Sara could stop them. "No." His answer was immediate and firm. "Mountains aren't safe for someone who doesn't know them." He strode away, leaving Sara feeling oddly dismissed. She watched him disappear into the livery and then made her way back to the hotel, trying not to feel useless. Mrs. Patterson found her in the lobby. "Don't take it personally, dear. Decker's not used to being around people much. He's lived alone up in those mountains for near 10 years now. Only comes to town when he has to." "Why does he live alone?" Sara asked, then immediately felt she had overstepped. "I'm sorry, that's none of my business." "It's no secret," Mrs. Patterson said. "His wife died 10 years ago. She was pregnant with their first child. There was a fever that swept through these parts. Took a lot of folks, including her. Decker blamed himself, thought he should have gotten her to a better doctor, should have protected her somehow. He sold their homestead and moved up into the high country. Built himself a cabin where he doesn't have to watch other people living the life he lost." Sara's heart contracted with sympathy. "That's terrible." "It is. He was different before, or so I'm told. I only arrived here 8 years ago, but people say he used to smile, used to be sociable. Now he's hard as the mountains he lives in." Mrs. Patterson patted Sara's arm. "But he's still a good man. Best tracker in the territory, and he saved more than one lost soul from those mountains." Sara spent the day helping Mrs. Patterson with small tasks around the hotel, refusing to sit idle while the older woman worked. As evening approached, she found herself watching the street, wondering if Decker had found the missing boy. Just as the sun was setting, she saw him ride into town with another horse trailing behind his. A young boy sat in the saddle, wrapped in a blanket, and a woman ran from one of the houses with a cry of relief. Sara stepped out onto the hotel porch to watch. Decker dismounted and helped the boy down, speaking briefly with the mother. Even from this distance, Sara could see the exhaustion in his posture. Whatever had happened in those mountains, it had not been easy. The grateful mother tried to press money into his hand, but he shook his head and mounted his horse again. Instead of heading back up into the mountains, though, he rode to the livery. Sara watched as he emerged a few minutes later on foot and walked toward the hotel. Her heart gave an odd little jump when she realized he was coming straight toward her. "Evening," he said, climbing the porch steps. Up close, she could see dirt on his clothes and a fresh scratch on his jaw. "Did you find him?" Sara asked, though she had seen that he did. "He'd fallen down a ravine, broken his ankle. Been there since yesterday. He'll be fine." Decker removed his hat and ran a hand through his long hair. "I need to talk to you." "To me?" Sara's surprise was genuine. "Inside," he said, gesturing to the hotel door. Confused, Sara led him into the small lobby. Mrs. Patterson had gone to the kitchen, leaving them alone. Decker stood by the window, his big frame making the space feel smaller. "You said you need work," he began without preamble. "Yes. I spoke with Reverend Miller about the teaching position, but they won't decide until next week. I have a different proposition." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I need someone to help me with something. It would mean coming up to my cabin in the mountains for a few weeks. The pay would be enough to get you to California or wherever else you want to go." Sara stared at him. "You want me to come to your cabin? Alone?" "I know how it sounds," Decker said, his voice gruff. But it's not what you think. I have a friend, a crow man named Running Wolf. His daughter is about to have her first baby, and there have been complications. She needs a woman to help her, someone who can stay with her for a few weeks until the baby comes and she's recovered. The Crow women in her village would normally help, but there's been tension with a rival band, and it's not safe for them to travel right now. Running Wolf asked me if I knew anyone in town who could help. I said I'd ask. Why would you think of me? Sara asked. Because you need money and a place to stay, and because you don't strike me as the type to scare easily. You held together pretty well yesterday after what happened. Sara's mind raced. Going alone into the mountains with a man she barely knew was risky, possibly foolish. But what choice did she have? She could not afford to stay at the hotel indefinitely, and there was no guarantee the town would hire her as a teacher. "How far is your cabin?" she asked. "About 3 hours' ride up into the high country." "And this woman who needs help, Running Wolf's daughter, she's nearby. Her husband's trapping cabin is about an hour's walk from mine. I'd take you there, introduce you, make sure everything's settled. You'd stay with them until the baby comes and she's strong enough that her husband can manage alone. And you'd pay me for this, $50. It's what I'd pay a midwife if I could find one willing to travel up there." $50 was more money than Sara had possessed in her entire life. It would be enough to continue to California to start over properly. But still, she hesitated. "If you're worried about your reputation, Mrs. Patterson can vouch that this is legitimate," Decker said. "Running Wolf is well known and respected, and I give you my word that you'd be safe. I don't hurt women." There was something in the way he said this last part, a deep sincerity that made Sara believe him. She thought of the way he had saved her from the bandits, how he had paid for her room without expecting anything in return, how he had spent all day searching for a lost boy. "All right," she heard herself say. "I'll do it." Something flickered in Decker's eyes, surprise maybe, or approval. "We'll leave tomorrow morning, bring warm clothes. The mountains are cold at night, even in summer." He left without another word, and Sara stood in the empty lobby, wondering what she had just agreed to. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Sara packed her few belongings, dressed in her warmest dress, and met Decker outside the livery stable. He had procured a gentle mare for her, and helped her mount without comment on her less than expert horsemanship. They rode out of Red Cloud as the town was waking up, heading north into the foothills. At first, the terrain was familiar, rolling grassland dotted with scrub brush and the occasional tree. But as they climbed higher, the landscape changed. Pine forests closed in around them, the air grew thinner and cooler, and the vast Montana sky seemed to expand overhead. Decker rode ahead, silent and watchful. Sara followed, trying to keep up with his steady pace. He had not been exaggerating when he said he knew these mountains. He moved through the wilderness with absolute confidence, following trails that Sara could barely see, reading the landscape like other people read books. They stopped once to rest the horses and eat some of the food Mrs. Patterson had packed. Decker handed Sara a canteen and some dried beef, then walked a little distance away, scanning the surrounding forest. "You watch for something specific?" Sara asked. "Everything," he replied. "Bear, mountain lion, hostile hunting parties, signs of fire. The mountains are beautiful, but they'll kill you if you're not careful. Yet you choose to live here." He glanced at her, and for the first time she saw something other than guardedness in his expression. "The mountains don't lie to you. They don't pretend to be something they're not. You know exactly what you're getting." Unlike people, Sara thought, but did not say aloud. She understood, though. After what he had been through, after losing his wife and child, perhaps the honest danger of the wilderness was preferable to the complicated pain of human relationships. They continued climbing, and Sara began to see why Decker had warned her to bring warm clothes. Despite the August sunshine, the air held a crisp edge. The trees grew denser, towering pines that blocked out much of the light. Eagles circled overhead, and once, Sara saw a deer watching them from a distance before it bounded away. Finally, as the sun reached its zenith, they emerged into a clearing, and Sara saw Decker's cabin. It was larger than she had expected, built of solid logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. A small barn stood nearby, and a creek ran behind the property, its water clear and cold. The view was spectacular, overlooking a valley with mountains rising in the distance. "This is beautiful," Sara said, unable to keep the awe from her voice. Decker dismounted and helped her down. "It serves," he said gruffly, but she thought she detected a hint of pride. He led the horses to the barn and unsaddled them while Sara stood in the clearing, taking in the absolute quiet. She had grown up in cities and towns where there was always noise, always activity. This silence was profound and almost overwhelming. When Decker finished with the horses, he gestured for her to follow him inside. The cabin's interior was surprisingly comfortable. There was a main room with a large stone fireplace, a handmade table and chairs, shelves lined with books and furs covering the floor. A doorway led to what Sara assumed was a bedroom. "You'll sleep in the bed," Decker said. "I'll take the floor out here." "I cannot take your bed," Sara protested. "You can and you will. I'm not having Running Wolf think I'm making his guests sleep on the floor." His tone brooked no argument. Sara nodded, too tired from the ride to fight about it. Decker pulled some provisions from a cupboard and began preparing a simple meal of beans and cornbread. As he worked, Sara found herself watching him, noting the economical way he moved, the competence in his large hands. "You're staring," he said without looking up. Sara flushed. "I'm sorry. I was just thinking that you're very self-sufficient. Have to be up here. Can't run to the general store when you run out of flour. Do you ever get lonely?" His hand stilled for just a moment. "No," he said, but there was something in the word that made Sara think he was lying, if only to himself. They ate in silence, and afterward, Decker announced they would walk to Running Wolf's daughter's cabin before dark. They followed a narrow trail through the forest, and Sara struggled to keep up with Decker's long strides. Just when she was about to ask for a rest, they emerged into another, smaller clearing. The cabin here was more modest, but smoke curled from the chimney, and a vegetable garden grew beside it. Before they reached the door, it opened, and a native man stepped out. He was tall and lean, probably in his 50s, with long gray streaked hair and a face etched with wisdom and worry. "Decker," he said, clasping the mountain man's forearm in greeting. Then his eyes moved to Sara, and he studied her carefully. "Running Wolf, this is Sara Gibson. She's agreed to help Singing Bird." Running Wolf's stern expression softened slightly. "You are welcome, Sara Gibson. My daughter needs help that her husband and I cannot provide." He led them inside, where a young woman lay on a bed near the fireplace. She was probably Sara's age, beautiful despite the obvious discomfort of late pregnancy. Her husband, a young man named Two Hawks, sat beside her, his face lined with worry. Singing Bird struggled to sit up when they entered, and Sara immediately went to her side. "Please, don't get up. I'm here to help you." For the next hour, Sara learned the situation. Singing Bird's baby was breech, and she had been having pains for 2 days. The nearest doctor was in Red Cloud, too far for a woman in her condition to travel safely. Two Hawks was a skilled hunter but knew nothing of childbirth, and Running Wolf, despite his years, was equally helpless in this female domain. Sara had helped deliver babies before. In St. Louis, She had assisted a midwife in her neighborhood, earning a little extra money and learning skills that most young women of her class never acquired. She examined Singing Bird carefully and felt relief when she realized the situation, while serious, was not hopeless. "The baby hasn't turned yet, but there's still time," Sara told them. "I know some techniques that might help, and if they don't work, I've assisted with breech births before. It's difficult but possible." Hope flickered in Two Hawk's eyes. Running Wolf nodded gravely. "Then you will stay here, help my daughter, of course," Sara said. Decker, who had been standing near the door, spoke up. "I'll bring supplies from my cabin. Whatever you need." "I'll make a list," Sara said. That night, Sara stayed at the small cabin while Decker returned to his own home. She worked with Singing Bird, showing her positions that might encourage the baby to turn, preparing the things they would need for the birth. Two Hawks and Running Wolf watched anxiously, clearly unused to being helpless in the face of such female mysteries. Over the next few days, a pattern emerged. Sara stayed with Singing Bird during the day, caring for her, talking with her, forming a friendship despite the language barrier that sometimes made communication challenging. Running Wolf spoke English well and translated when needed, and Sara was surprised to find herself enjoying the time with this small family. Decker came by each morning, bringing supplies, checking on their welfare, and then disappearing into the mountains to hunt or trap. Sometimes Sara caught glimpses of him through the cabin window, chopping wood or repairing something on the property. He never stayed long, never intruded, but his presence was somehow reassuring. One afternoon, about a week after Sara's arrival, Singing Bird suddenly gasped and grabbed her belly. "The baby," she said in halting English. "It moves different." Sara examined her and felt a surge of triumph. The baby's turned, its head down now, the right position. Relief flooded the small cabin. Two Hawks actually smiled for the first time since Sara had met him, and Running Wolf nodded with satisfaction. They were not out of danger yet, but this was a significant step in the right direction. That evening, when Decker arrived with fresh meat he had hunted, Sara met him outside to share the good news. "The baby's in the right position now," she told him, unable to keep the satisfaction from her voice. Something almost like a smile crossed Decker's face. "You did well." "I'm just glad I could help." They stood in the fading light, and for a moment there was a comfortable silence between them. Then Decker asked, "Why were you traveling to California alone?" Sara had known he would ask eventually. "I was running away," she said honestly. "My uncle wanted me to marry a man I didn't love, a man who frightened me. So I took what little money I had saved and bought a place on that wagon train. That took courage, or desperation. I'm not sure there's much difference." Decker studied her, his gray eyes thoughtful. "Where are your parents?" "Dead. My mother died when I was 16, my father a year later. My uncle was my only family, and he saw me as a burden he could get rid of by marrying me off." "And what will you do when you leave here? Still head to California?" Sara had been wondering the same thing. "I suppose so, unless Red Cloud decides to hire me as a teacher. Mrs. Patterson said they need one." "You'd stay in Red Cloud." Something in his voice made her look at him more closely, but his expression revealed nothing. "I might. I like Montana. It's beautiful here, despite everything that's happened." Decker nodded slowly. "It's a hard land, but it's honest. If you can survive it, it rewards that." Before Sara could respond, Running Wolf called from inside and she had to go. But as she returned to the cabin, she found herself thinking about Decker Reed, wondering what it would be like to know him better, to see behind the walls he had built around himself. The baby came 2 weeks later, in the middle of a stormy night. Sara had been dozing by the fire when Singing Bird cried out, and suddenly, everything was urgent motion. Two hawks ran to fetch his father-in-law, and Sara prepared everything they would need. The labor was long and difficult. Singing Bird was strong, but it was her first child and she was frightened. Sara held her hand, spoke encouragingly, did everything she had learned from the midwife in St. Louis. Running Wolf and two hawks waited outside in the rain, tradition dictating that men not be present for the birth. As dawn broke, Sara heard the most beautiful sound in the world, a baby's first cry. Singing Bird had delivered a healthy boy, perfect in every way. Sara cleaned the infant, wrapped him in soft furs, and placed him in his mother's arms. "He's beautiful," Sara said, tears streaming down her own face. Singing Bird looked down at her son with such love that Sara's heart ached. Two hawks was called in, and the young father's face transformed with joy and wonder. Running Wolf followed, and the old warrior's eyes shone with unshed tears as he looked at his grandson. Sara cleaned up quietly, giving the family their privacy. She was exhausted but exhilarated, filled with the profound satisfaction of having helped bring new life into the world. She stepped outside into the cool morning air and nearly ran into Decker. He was soaking wet, standing in the clearing with rain dripping from his hat. "I heard the baby cry," he said. "Is everyone all right?" "Yes. A boy, healthy and strong, mother's tired but well." Relief washed over his face, and in that moment, Sara saw past his careful guard. She saw the man he had been before tragedy hardened him, the man who had once been a husband anticipating fatherhood. The pain in his eyes was sudden and raw, and then just as quickly, it was hidden again. "That's good," he said roughly. "I'll come back later with supplies." He turned to leave, but Sara caught his arm. "Decker, wait." He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then at her face. Rain plastered his long hair to his head and shoulders, and he looked wild and beautiful and heartbreakingly alone. "Thank you," Sara said softly, "for bringing me here, for giving me this opportunity. I know you did it to help Running Wolf, but you helped me too." "You earned your pay," he said. "No need to thank me." But Sara did not release his arm. "Can I ask you something?" He tensed but nodded. "Do you ever think about having a family again? About not being alone?" For a long moment he just looked at her, rain running down his face. Then he gently removed her hand from his arm. "No," he said. "That part of my life is over." He walked away into the forest, leaving Sara standing in the rain, her heart unexpectedly heavy. Over the next week, Sara continued to stay with Singing Bird, helping her learn to care for her newborn son, making sure she recovered properly from the birth. But each day, Decker's words echoed in her mind. "That part of my life is over." She told herself it did not matter. She barely knew the man. She would take her pay, return to Red Cloud, and either teach school or continue to California. Decker Raid and his lonely mountain existence would become nothing more than a memory. But she found herself watching for him each day, looking forward to his brief visits. And she noticed things about him that probably no one else saw. The way his expression softened when he looked at the baby. The care he took in bringing supplies, always thinking of what they might need before they asked. The way he had repaired the cabin's roof without being asked, had chopped enough wood to last them through winter, had left fresh meat at their door more times than could be explained by simple friendship with Running Wolf. He was a protector by nature, Sara realized. He might have isolated himself in these mountains, might have convinced himself that he wanted no part of human connection, but his instinct to care for others was too strong to be completely suppressed. One afternoon, Sara was washing clothes in the creek near Two Hawk's cabin when she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. A low, rumbling growl. She looked up slowly and saw a massive bear standing 30 feet away, watching her with dark, intelligent eyes. Sara froze, her mind racing. She had been in Montana long enough to hear stories about bear attacks. You were supposed to back away slowly, avoid eye contact, make yourself look small. But her legs would not move. The bear took a step toward her, and Sarah's heart hammered so hard she thought it might break. Then a voice, low and commanding, came from somewhere behind her. "Don't move, Decker." Sarah wanted to turn and look for him, but she did not dare take her eyes off the bear. The bear rose up on its hind legs, towering above her, its mouth open in a roar that shook the air. Sarah heard Decker moving, and then he was between her and the bear, his rifle raised, his body a solid wall of protection. "Get behind me," he said. "Slow, don't run." Sarah forced her trembling legs to move, inching backward until she was behind Decker's broad back. The bear dropped to all fours and swung its massive head from side to side. "Easy," Decker said, his voice calm and steady. "We're leaving now. No threat to you." He began to back up, keeping himself between Sarah and the bear, the rifle still raised and ready. The bear watched them but did not charge. Slowly, carefully, they made their way back toward the cabin. When they were finally far enough away that the bear lost interest and wandered off, Sarah's legs gave out entirely. Decker caught her before she hit the ground, swinging her up into his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing. Sarah was shaking so hard her teeth chattered, and she could not seem to catch her breath. "I've got you," Decker said, carrying her toward the cabin. "You're safe. I've got you." He brought her inside, where Running Wolf and two hawks immediately wanted to know what had happened. Decker explained briefly while he settled Sarah in a chair by the fire. Someone brought her water, and gradually her shaking subsided. "I thought I was going to die," she whispered. "Bears don't usually attack unless they feel threatened," Decker said, crouching in front of her chair. "You just surprised each other, but you should never go to the creek alone. Always take someone with you, or at least a gun." "I don't know how to use a gun." Something shifted in his expression. "Then I'll teach you." Over the next few days, Decker did exactly that. Each afternoon, he took Sarah out to a clearing away from the cabins and taught her to load, aim, and fire his rifle. She was not a natural shot, but she improved with practice, and more importantly, she learned not to be afraid of the weapon. But the lessons became about more than just shooting. They talked during those afternoons, slowly at first, then more easily. Sarah told him about her life in St. Louis, about her parents, about her dreams of teaching and having a life of her own choosing. Decker, in turn, began to share pieces of himself. He had been raised in Kentucky, came west when he was 20, looking for adventure and opportunity. He had met his wife, Charlotte, in a town not unlike Red Cloud. She had been a shopkeeper's daughter, smart and brave, and Decker had loved her instantly. "We had 2 years together," he said one afternoon, his voice distant. "Best 2 years of my life. When she got pregnant, I thought I had everything a man could want. Then the fever came and she was gone in 3 days. The baby died with her, a daughter. We were going to name her Emily." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Decker." He stared out at the mountains. "For a long time I wished I had died too. It would have been easier. But I didn't, so I came up here where I didn't have to see other people with their families with the things I'd lost. I convinced myself I was fine alone." "And are you?" Sarah asked softly. "Fine alone?" Decker looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his eyes made her breath catch. "I thought I was," he said, "until recently." They stood in the clearing, the rifle forgotten, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. Sarah wanted to ask him what he meant, wanted to tell him that she felt something too, something that had been growing since the moment he saved her from those bandits. But before she could find the words, Running Wolf appeared through the trees. "Decker, Sarah, you should come. The baby has a fever." They ran back to the cabin, and Sarah's heart sank when she saw the tiny infant, his face flushed and hot. Singing Bird was crying and two hawks looked terrified. Sara examined the baby carefully. "It's not terribly high," she said, "but with infants any fever is concerning. We need to keep him cool, make sure Singing Bird continues nursing so he gets fluids." They worked through the night. Sara showed them how to sponge the baby with cool water, how to watch for signs that the fever was worsening. Decker rode down to his cabin and returned with herbs he said the crow healers used for fever, and they made a weak tea that they gave to Singing Bird, knowing it would pass to the baby through her milk. By dawn, the fever had broken. The baby nursed hungrily, and his parents collapsed with relief. Sara, exhausted, stepped outside and found Decker sitting on the porch steps, his head in his hands. She sat down beside him. "He's going to be fine." "I know." But he did not lift his head. Sara understood then. The baby's illness had brought back memories of his own daughter, of his wife, of everything he had lost. She reached out and gently touched his shoulder. "Decker." He looked up, and the raw pain in his face nearly broke her heart. "You don't have to carry this alone," she said. "You don't have to punish yourself forever for something that wasn't your fault." "I should have saved her." His voice was hoarse. "I should have done something." "You couldn't have. Sometimes terrible things happen, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop them. But that doesn't mean you stop living. Charlotte wouldn't want that for you. You didn't know her." "No, but I know she loved you, and no woman who loves a man wants him to spend the rest of his life in pain because of her." Decker stared at her, something shifting behind his eyes. Then slowly, he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "You're not what I expected," he said quietly. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. But not someone who makes me want things I've spent 10 years telling myself I don't need." Sara's heart raced. "What things?" Instead of answering, Decker leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle and tentative, as if he was unsure of his right to do so. Sara's eyes closed, and she kissed him back, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the strong beat of his heart. When they pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. Decker rested his forehead against hers. "I don't know how to do this anymore," he whispered. "I don't know if I even remember how to be with someone." "Then we'll figure it out together," Sara said. They sat on those porch steps as the sun rose over the mountains, holding hands, not needing words. Something fundamental had shifted between them, and Sara knew with absolute certainty that her life had just changed direction entirely. Over the next 2 weeks, Singing Bird regained her strength and the baby thrived. Sara had fulfilled her obligation, earned her pay, but she found herself reluctant to leave. She and Decker spent every possible moment together, talking, walking through the mountain forests, learning each other. He showed her the places he loved best, secret meadows filled with wildflowers, crystal streams where fish jumped, vistas that stretched for miles. She told him about her dreams and fears, about the life she had imagined for herself, and was surprised to find that those dreams were changing, reshaping themselves around this man and these mountains. One evening, they sat on the porch of Decker's cabin, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Sara leaned against him, his arm around her shoulders, feeling more at peace than she had in years. "I should go back to Red Cloud soon," she said, though the words felt wrong even as she spoke them. Decker's arm tightened around her. "The teacher position?" "Yes. And I need to see if the wagon train is still there, if there's a way to continue to California." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Or you could stay." Sara's heart leaped, but she made herself ask, "Stay where? At the hotel?" "Stay here, with me." She pulled back to look at him. In the fading light, his face was serious, his gray eyes intense. "I know it's crazy," he continued. "We've only known each other a few weeks, But Sara, I haven't felt this alive in 10 years. When I'm with you, I remember what it's like to want a future, to hope for something beyond just surviving another day. I want you to stay. Not as a guest, not temporarily. I want you to stay and build a life here with me. Decker, Sara whispered, joy flooding through her. I don't have much to offer, he said quickly. Just this cabin, this land, and a life that's hard and lonely sometimes. But I promise I'll protect you, provide for you, and love you with everything I have. If you'll have me. Sara cupped his face in her hands. I don't need California. I don't need anything but this, but you. Yes, Decker. Yes, I'll stay. He kissed her then, deeply and passionately, and Sara felt herself falling into it, into him, into this new life she had never imagined but suddenly wanted more than anything. They were married a week later in Red Cloud, with running wolf, singing bird, 2 hawks, and the baby in attendance. Mrs. Patterson cried happy tears, and even Sheriff Tom came, broken leg and all. Reverend Miller performed the ceremony, and when Decker slipped a simple gold band on Sara's finger and kissed her as his wife, she knew she had finally found where she belonged. They returned to the mountain cabin, and Sara set about making it a home. She planted a vegetable garden, using seeds Mrs. Patterson had given her as a wedding present. She arranged Decker's sparse furniture more comfortably, added curtains to the windows, and brought beauty to the practical space. But more than the physical changes, she brought light to Decker's life. He smiled now, laughed sometimes, and slowly let go of the grief that had haunted him for so long. He taught Sara to hunt and track, to read the weather and the wilderness. She taught him that it was all right to be happy again, to hope again, to love again. The first winter was hard. Snow piled high around the cabin, and there were days when they could not venture outside at all. But Sara found she did not mind. She had Decker, warm and solid, beside her at night, and books to read by the fire, and a sense of peace that she had never known before. In the spring, Running Wolf and his family visited with news. They were moving to a new village further north, where game was more plentiful and tensions with rival bands less troublesome. It was a bittersweet farewell, but they promised to visit when they could, and Sara promised the same. As summer returned to the mountains, Sara began to suspect that her body was changing. She waited, not wanting to say anything until she was certain, but when 2 more months passed and there was no doubt, she told Decker one evening as they sat on the porch. "I'm pregnant," she said simply. Decker went completely still. Sara held her breath, unsure how he would react. Then he turned to her, and there were tears running down his weathered face. "Are you certain?" His voice shook. "Yes, I'd say the baby will come in late winter." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and Sara felt him trembling. "I'm scared," he whispered against her hair. "After what happened with Charlotte, I'm terrified." "I know," Sara said, "but I'm strong and we'll be careful. And when the time comes, we'll go to Red Cloud where there's a doctor. We'll do everything right." Decker pulled back, framing her face with his large hands. "I can't lose you," he said fiercely. "You've given me my life back, Sara. I can't lose you." "You won't," she promised. "I'm not going anywhere." The pregnancy was healthy and uncomplicated. As Sara's belly grew, Decker became increasingly protective, hardly letting her out of his sight. When the first snows came in November, he insisted they move to Red Cloud for the winter, taking a room at Mrs. Patterson's hotel so Sara would be near the doctor. It was strange being back in town after months in the mountains, but Sara adapted. She helped Mrs. Patterson around the hotel, visited with the women she had met before, and prepared for the baby's arrival. Decker found work as a scout for the cavalry unit stationed nearby, bringing in extra money and staying close to his wife. In February of 1877, During a fierce blizzard that shut down the town for 3 days, Sara went into labor. Decker was beside himself with worry, pacing the hotel room like a caged animal while Dr. Henderson attended to Sara. The labor was long, and there were moments when fear gripped them both. But Sara was strong and she had good care, and when the baby finally came, filling the room with lusty cries, she felt a triumph that was almost spiritual. "It's a boy," Dr. Henderson announced. "Healthy and strong." Decker, who had been allowed back into the room, stood frozen by the door. Sara, exhausted but elated, held out her hand to him. "Come meet your son," she said. He approached slowly, as if afraid he might break something. When he looked down at the tiny, red-faced infant in Sara's arms, his face transformed. All the fear, all the old pain, melted away, replaced by wonder. "He's perfect," Decker whispered. "What should we name him?" Sara asked. Decker was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Daniel, after my father." Sara smiled. "Daniel Raid, it's perfect." Decker carefully took the baby, holding him with a gentleness that seemed impossible in such large, rough hands. He looked at Sara with so much love it made her chest tight. "Thank you," he said. "For this, for everything, for staying." Sara remembered the day they had met, when she had been so desperate and lost, and Decker had offered her a lifeline without even knowing what it would lead to. She remembered his words in the forest, that he wanted her to stay. And she thought about how sometimes the worst moments of your life could lead to the best ones, how getting lost was sometimes the only way to find where you truly belonged. "I almost ran," she admitted. "That first night in Red Cloud, I almost took whatever money I could scrape together and just disappeared, headed anywhere that wasn't here." Decker looked up from the baby, surprise in his eyes. "Why didn't you?" "Because something in me recognized something in you. Even then, when we were strangers, I saw the good man behind all that pain and isolation, and I wanted to know you to help you if I could." "I'm glad you stayed," Decker said. "I'm glad you didn't run." Sara reached up and touched his face. "So am I." They returned to the mountain cabin when Daniel was 6 weeks old, and Sara found herself seeing their home with new eyes. It was no longer just Decker's isolated refuge, but a real home, filled with life and love and hope for the future. The years that followed were good ones. Daniel grew into a sturdy boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's smile. When he was 3, Sara gave birth to a daughter they named Charlotte Emily, honoring the memory of the woman and child Decker had lost. He cried when Sara suggested the name, but they were healing tears, full of gratitude rather than pain. Decker continued to scout and hunt, but he took fewer long-range jobs, preferring to stay close to his family. Sara taught both children to read using the books from Decker's shelves, and eventually began teaching other mountain children whose families lived scattered through the high country. Her little school met twice a week in the warmer months, and she found deep satisfaction in the work. Running Wolf and his family visited when they could, and the children played together, learning from each other, bridging the worlds of their different peoples. Singing Bird's son grew strong and tall, and she had 2 more children, daughters who looked at Daniel and Charlotte with shy admiration. Red Cloud grew too, evolving from a rough frontier town into a proper community. A railroad spur came through in 1882, bringing more people, more commerce, and more civilization. But up in their mountain cabin, Decker and Sara's life remained largely unchanged, governed by the seasons and the land rather than the rush of progress. On a summer evening in 1886, Sara sat on the porch she had sat on so many times before, watching the sun set over the mountains. She was 32 now, Decker 40, and they had built a life she never could have imagined in those desperate days when she fled St. Louis. Decker came out and sat beside her, handing her a cup of coffee. Down in the yard, Daniel, now 9, was teaching 6-year-old Charlotte how to throw a knife at a target. Both children were tanned and healthy, as wild and free as the mountains themselves. "You ever regret it?" Decker asked, following her gaze. "Staying here instead of going to California, living this hard life instead of something easier?" Sara leaned against him, fitting perfectly into his side as she always had. "Never. Not once. Even when the winters are hard and we're snowed in for weeks. Even then. Even when the nearest neighbor is miles away and you go days without seeing another woman." Decker read, "Are you trying to make me doubt my choices?" Sara asked with a smile. He grinned, an expression that still had the power to make her heart flutter. "No, I'm reminding myself how lucky I am that you made them." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children, listening to the sounds of the forest settling in for the night. An owl called in the distance. The creek burbled behind the cabin. Stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. "I was so certain my life was over," Decker said quietly. "After Charlotte died, I was convinced that all I had left was surviving until I didn't have to anymore. Then you came along, scared and brave and stubborn, and suddenly I wanted to live again. You saved me, Sara." "You saved me too," Sara replied. "From a life I never wanted, from men who would have destroyed me. You gave me freedom and safety and love. We saved each other." He kissed the top of her head. "She'll run away first chance she gets. That's what I thought when I saw you in Red Cloud." "You had that look, like you were always measuring the distance to the nearest exit," Sara laughed. "I probably was. I had spent so long being trapped that even when I was free, I couldn't quite believe it. So I decided I would make sure you wanted to stay," Decker continued. "Give you reasons to choose this life, this place. Me." "It worked," Sara said softly, "though I think I was already choosing you before you decided to make me want to stay. From that first moment when you saved me from those bandits, I felt something. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. I felt like I had finally found someone who saw me, really saw me, and didn't want to change me or control me or use me. You just wanted me to be safe and happy." "I still want that," Decker said. "Every day." Down in the yard, Daniel whooped with triumph as his knife hit the target, and Charlotte clapped her hands with delight. Sara watched them with a mother's love and satisfaction, thinking about all the moments that had led to this one, all the choices and chances and small miracles that had built this life. "Should we tell them?" Decker asked. Sara smiled and placed a hand on her still flat stomach. "About the new baby, soon. Let's wait another few weeks, make sure everything is well." Decker's hand covered hers, large and warm and protective. "How are you feeling?" "Good, strong. This one feels different somehow, calmer maybe." "Another boy or a girl, do you think? Does it matter?" "Not even a little bit," Decker said. "As long as you're both healthy." They called the children in as full dark descended, and the family gathered around the table for dinner. They held hands while Decker said grace, thanking God for the food, the land, and each other. As Sara looked around the table at her husband and children, she felt a peace so profound it brought tears to her eyes. This was what she had been searching for all along, though she had not known it when she boarded that wagon train in St. Louis. Not California with its gold and opportunity, not a teaching position in some town where she would always be an outsider. This. A home built with her own hands, children who would grow up free and strong, and a man who loved her with a fierceness that had survived grief and isolation to bloom again. After dinner, Decker read to the children from a book of adventures while Sara cleaned up. She could hear his deep voice rising and falling, hear the children's laughter and questions, and she smiled. He was a wonderful father, patient and loving and present in a way that many men of this era were not. When the children were finally in bed, Sara and Decker stepped outside one more time before sleep. The night air was cool and clean, filled with the scent of pine and earth. Stars blazed overhead in their thousands, undimmed by any town lights. "You remember what you said to me the first time I came here?" Sara asked. "When I was so scared of the bear." "I said a lot of things that day. You said, 'I've got you, you're safe.' And I believed you, even though I barely knew you." Decker pulled her close. "And was I right? Have I kept you safe?" Sara looked up at him, at this man who had been so broken when they met, who had built himself back together through love and determination. "You've done more than keep me safe. You've given me a life worth living, a family worth cherishing. You've shown me what it means to truly love someone and be loved in return." "I never thought I'd have this again," Decker admitted. "A wife, children, a future. I thought all of that was buried with Charlotte and our baby. But you taught me that the heart is bigger than we think, that it can hold grief and joy at the same time, that loving again doesn't mean forgetting what came before." "Charlotte would be happy for you," Sara said. "For us. I like to think she's watching sometimes, glad that you found your way back to life." "Maybe she is," Decker agreed. "And maybe she sent you to me, knowing I was too stubborn to find my way alone." They stood wrapped in each other's arms, under the vast Montana sky. And Sara thought about all the women who would come after her, who would travel west in search of something better. She hoped they would find what she had found, the courage to stay when it would be easier to run, the wisdom to recognize love when it appeared in unexpected forms. The baby came in March of 1887, another boy they named Thomas after Sara's father. The birth was easier this time, perhaps because Sara knew what to expect, or perhaps because she was simply that strong. Decker was there throughout, holding her hand, encouraging her, and when Thomas finally arrived, pink and squalling, Sara saw the last shadows of fear leave her husband's eyes. He had been tested by fire and survived. He had lost everything and rebuilt. He had loved, lost, and loved again. And in doing so, he had become the man he was always meant to be. As spring turned to summer and summer to fall, life in the mountain cabin continued its steady rhythm. Daniel was old enough now to help his father with the hunting and trapping, learning the skills he would need to survive in this wild country. Charlotte helped Sara with Thomas and with the household chores, but she also learned to shoot and track, refusing to be limited by her gender. Sara would not have had it any other way. She taught her daughter that women could be strong and capable, that they could choose their own paths. And Decker supported this completely, remembering how his wife had nearly been forced into a life she did not want. Years continued to pass, each one adding to the rich tapestry of their lives. They had challenges, certainly. There were hard winters when food ran low, summers when drought made the garden struggle, illnesses that had to be weathered without nearby doctors. But they faced these trials together, as a family, and emerged stronger each time. Daniel grew into a young man who was the image of his father, tall and strong with the same steady gray eyes. He took a wife when he was 22, a rancher's daughter named Margaret who had grown up in the valleys below and was not afraid of mountain life. They built a cabin within a few miles of Decker and Sara's home, and in time, they gave Sara and Decker grandchildren. Charlotte married a trapper she met during one of the trading trips to Red Cloud. He was a good man, respectful and kind, and he built his wife a cabin where she taught school to the scattered children of the mountain families. She had 3 children of her own, and she raised them with the same freedom and strength that Sara had given her. Thomas, the youngest, chose a different path. He loved the mountains like his father and siblings, but he also felt the pull of the wider world. When he was 18, he went to study at a university in the East, returning each summer to help with the hunting and trapping. He became a teacher and a writer, documenting the frontier life that was slowly vanishing as civilization crept westward. Through it all, Decker and Sara remained at the heart of their growing family, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They aged together gracefully, their hair turning gray, their faces lining with years, but their love never diminishing. If anything, it grew deeper and richer, seasoned by time and trial. On a summer evening in 1905, Sara sat on the porch once again. She was 51 now, and Decker was 59. Their children were grown with families of their own. The Montana Territory had become Montana State. The wild frontier they had known was becoming history. But up here in these mountains, life remained largely the same. The cabin had been expanded and improved over the years, but it was still fundamentally the home Decker had built with his own hands. The creek still ran behind it. The forest still stretched in all directions. The sky was still impossibly vast and blue. Decker came out and settled beside her with the ease of long practice. His hair was completely gray now, but he was still strong, still capable, still the protector he had always been. "Do you remember the day we met?" Sara asked. "Really met, I mean, not just you saving me from the bandits, but later when you came to the hotel." "I remember everything about you," Decker said. "I remember thinking you were the bravest person I'd ever met, running away from everything you knew to try to make a better life. And I remember knowing, even then, that you were going to change everything." "I was so scared," Sara admitted. "When you asked me to come up here, I almost said no. It seemed crazy to trust a stranger, to go alone into the wilderness with a man I didn't know. But you did it anyway. Because something in me recognized you, knew you were safe, and because I was desperate enough to take a chance." Sara smiled. "Best decision I ever made." "Second best," Decker corrected. "The best was choosing to stay." They watched the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple. Somewhere in the forest, their grandson was checking trap lines with Daniel. Down the mountain, Charlotte was probably putting her children to bed, and out east, Thomas was teaching young people about the frontier that had shaped him. "We built something good, didn't we?" Sara said softly. "We built something extraordinary," Decker replied. "A family, a life, a legacy. And we did it against all odds, against all expectations." He stood and offered her his hand. Sara took it, allowing him to pull her to her feet. They stood close, looking out over the land they had made their own, and Sara felt the same contentment she had felt on countless evenings before. "I love you," she said. "I have loved you every day since I agreed to stay, and I will love you every day until my last breath." Decker cupped her face gently, his eyes soft with emotion. "And I love you. You took a broken man and made him whole. You gave me reasons to live when I thought I had none. You are everything good in my life, Sara Reed." He kissed her, tender and sweet, and Sara kissed him back, pouring 3 decades of love into that simple gesture. They had been young once, desperate and frightened and searching. But they had found each other, had chosen each other, and in doing so had created something beautiful. As they turned to go inside, Sara looked back one more time at the mountains that had become her home, at the vast sky that had witnessed her transformation from a scared girl running from her past to a woman who had built a future worth living. She thought about all the moments, large and small, that had brought her here. The bandits, the wagon train, the mountain man who had offered her a chance, the baby she had helped deliver, the bear in the forest, the first kiss, the wedding, the children, the years of joy and struggle and growth. It had not been an easy life. Mountain living never was. But it had been a good life, full of love and purpose and meaning. And if Sara could go back to that frightened girl on the wagon train, she would tell her not to be afraid, that everything was going to turn out better than she could possibly imagine. She would tell her that sometimes getting lost is how you find yourself. That sometimes the worst moments lead to the best ones. That courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. Most of all, she would tell her that when you find someone who sees you, really sees you, who wants you to be free and safe and happy, you should have the courage to stay. Because that is love, real love, and it is worth every risk, every fear, every leap of faith. As Sara followed Decker into their cabin, into the life they had built together, she smiled. She had been given a choice all those years ago to run or to stay, and she had chosen to stay. She had chosen love. She had chosen Decker, and that choice had made all the difference. The door closed behind them, shutting out the Montana night, and inside the cabin glowed with lamplight and warmth, and the quiet comfort of a life well lived. Outside, the mountains stood eternal and unchanging, silent witnesses to the stories that played out in their shadow. And somewhere in the vast wilderness, other hearts were searching, other souls were hoping, other chances were waiting to be taken. But for Decker and Sara Reed, the searching was over. They had found what they were looking for in each other, and they would spend the rest of their days grateful for the moment when a desperate woman and a lonely man took a chance on something neither of them expected: love, home, family, forever.